Welcome, enlightened ones. Let's elevate. You already know why you're here. Something has been tugging at you. Not loud, not dramatic, just that quiet knowing that keeps showing up when you try to ignore it. The thing you keep brushing off. The feeling you keep explaining away. The moment you replay and then tell yourself it wasn't that serious. This isn't about fear. This is about clarity. Because red flags don't arrive screaming. They arrive whispering. They arrive as discomfort you talk yourself out of. They arrive as tension you call chemistry. They arrive as disrespect you rename misunderstanding. And the truth is, you didn't miss the signs. You saw them. You felt them. Your body noticed before your mind ever caught up. That tightening in your chest. That pause in your spirit. That moment where something didn't sit right. You noticed. But you were taught to override yourself. You were taught to be understanding, to be patient, to give the benefit of the doubt, to see the potential, to wait it out, to not make waves. And slowly, without realizing it, you learned how to betray your own instincts in the name of keeping the peace. But peace that costs you your intuition is not peace. It's self-abandonment dressed up as maturity. Red flags aren't punishments. They're protection. They're information. They're your inner wisdom tapping you on the shoulders saying, pay attention here. And the most dangerous thing you can do is convince yourself that what you feel isn't real. Because the moment you start dismissing red flags, you start dismissing yourself. You start shrinking your truth to fit into situations that were never meant to hold you. You start normalizing things that slowly drain you. You start adapting to environments that require you to go numb just to survive them. And you call it love, or loyalty, or growth. But your nervous system knows the difference. Your spirit knows when it's being compromised. You don't need more evidence. You don't need a dramatic ending. You don't need them to turn into a villain to justify your discomfort. The red flag was the discomfort. That's it. That's the signal. When someone consistently makes you question your worth, when your needs feel like inconveniences, when your boundaries are treated like obstacles instead of guidelines, when you leave interactions feeling smaller, heavier, or confused. Those are not coincidences. Those are communications. And the longer you ignore them, the louder they become. At first, it's a subtle unease. Then it's anxiety you can't explain. Then it's exhaustion. Then it's self-doubt. Then it's resentment, then it's numbness, and by the time you finally say something is wrong, you're already knee-deep in a version of yourself that forgot how to trust her own voice. That's why red flags matter early, not because you're dramatic, not because you're guarded, but because you're awake, because awareness isn't pessimism, it's discernment, and discernment doesn't mean you judge harshly, it means you observe honestly. You stop romanticizing potential while ignoring patterns. You stop explaining behavior that keeps repeating. You stop handing out access to people who haven't earned it. Red flags are patterns, not mistakes. Everyone messes up. Everyone has bad days. But patterns reveal character. Patterns reveal priorities. Patterns reveal what someone will protect and what they will sacrifice. And if you keep seeing the same thing in different forms, that's not bad luck. That's information asking you to act. The problem isn't that you see the red flags. The problem is that you've been taught that honoring them makes you difficult, that walking away makes you heartless, that choosing yourself makes you selfish, that needing consistency makes you demanding, that wanting respect makes you sensitive. So you stay, you overextend, you explain yourself one more time. You hope clarity will suddenly land on someone who's already shown you who they are. And all the while, your intuition is getting quieter. Not because it disappeared, but because you stopped listening. Every time you override that inner voice, it learns that you won't back it up. And eventually, it stops speaking as loudly. That's when people say they feel disconnected from themselves. That's when they say they don't know who they are anymore. It didn't happen overnight. It happened in every moment you told yourself to ignore what you felt. Red flags aren't always abusive. Sometimes they're subtle. Inconsistency, avoidance, deflection, lack of accountability. Words that sound good but don't line up with actions. apologies without change, affection without reliability, charm without depth, intensity without safety. And if you've ever felt confused by someone, that confusion is the red flag. Clarity feels calm. Healthy connection doesn't leave you spiraling. It doesn't require you to decode behavior. It doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much when you're asking for basic respect. When something is right, your body doesn't brace itself. It doesn't stay on edge. It doesn't prepare for impact. And you don't need to convince yourself to stay. You don't need pep talks to tolerate it. You don't need to numb yourself to survive it. Red flags exist to save you time, to save you energy, to save you from unlearning yourself later. And here's the part that matters most. You don't need permission to leave what doesn't feel right. You don't need a courtroom-level case. You don't need witnesses. You don't need validation from people who aren't living your life. Your experience is enough. Your discomfort is enough. Your inner knowing is enough. You're allowed to trust yourself without being able to explain every detail, because intuition doesn't speak in paragraphs. It speaks in sensations, in pauses, in resistance, in that quiet no that shows up even when everything looks fine on paper. And if you keep dismissing that no, life has a way of turning it into a louder lesson, not as punishment, but as consequence. Because what you tolerate teaches people how to treat you. And more importantly, it teaches you how to treat yourself. Every time you ignore a red flag, you send yourself a message that your comfort comes second, that your needs are negotiable, that your boundaries are flexible when someone pushes hard enough. And that message doesn't stay contained in one relationship. It leaks into everything: your work, your friendships, your self-talk, your standards, until one day you wake up and realize you've been living beneath your own values, not because you didn't know better, but because you didn't honor what you knew. This is your reminder. You are not too much for noticing patterns. You are not wrong for needing consistency. You are not dramatic for wanting to feel safe. You are not unkind for walking away early. You are self-respecting. And self-respect will always look threatening to people who benefit from your silence. Red flags often show up when someone is testing how much you'll tolerate, how far they can go, how much you'll excuse, how often you'll bend. And every time you stay quiet, the test escalates. Not because they're evil, but because human nature pushes boundaries where there are none. Your boundaries are not walls. They are instructions. They tell the world how to engage with you. And red flags are signals that those instructions are being ignored. You don't need to argue with that. You don't need to prove it. You need to respond. Response doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes response is distance. Sometimes response is detachment. Sometimes response is simply no longer offering access. Not everything deserves an explanation. Some things deserve an exit. And if you're someone who sees the good in people, this is especially important, because your compassion can become a liability when it's not balanced with discernment. Seeing potential doesn't obligate you to stay. Understanding someone's wounds doesn't mean you have to bleed for them. Empathy without boundaries turns into self-neglect. And you were not put here to be consumed by situations that drain you. You were put here to evolve, to expand, to align with what meets you in truth. Red flags don't mean someone is all bad. They mean they're not aligned with you. And alignment matters, because misalignment is exhausting. It requires constant adjustment, constant explanation, constant compromise of self. And over time, that cost becomes too high. You start losing pieces of yourself that take a long time to get back. So if something in you has been whispering, pay attention, not with fear, but with respect. Respect for your lived experience, respect for your intuition, respect for the version of you that's trying to protect your future. You don't need to harden your heart. You need to sharpen your awareness. You don't need to distrust everyone. You need to trust yourself. Because when you do, red flags stop feeling confusing. They feel clarifying. They stop pulling you into chaos and start guiding you toward peace. This is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. Clear about what you allow. Clear about what you deserve. Clear about when something isn't meant to continue. And the moment you stop dismissing red flags is the moment you stop abandoning yourself. That's when your energy shifts. That's when your standards rise. That's when your life begins to reflect the respect you finally chose to give yourself. And this is only the beginning. You don't need another breakdown to convince you. You already feel it. That moment when something shifts inside you. When your energy pulls back before your mind does. That's not coincidence. That's self-awareness waking up. And this is where most people get stuck. Not at the red flag itself, but at the moment they realize they saw it and still stayed. This is the part nobody likes to talk about. Because it's uncomfortable. Because it forces honesty. Because it removes the illusion that you didn't know, you knew. And knowing doesn't make you weak. Ignoring it does. Not because you're broken, but because you were conditioned. Conditioned to tolerate. Conditioned to endure. Conditioned to believe that love requires suffering. Conditioned to think leaving early means you failed. But listen to me. Staying in something misaligned doesn't make you loyal. It makes you tired. It makes you smaller. It makes you quieter than you were meant to be. And the longer you stay where you don't belong, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before you started adjusting. That's how people lose themselves. Not through one big betrayal, but through 1,000 small dismissals of their own truth. You didn't become confused overnight. You became confused every time you felt something was off and told yourself to wait, to be patient, to be nicer, to be less reactive. And slowly, your instincts learned that they weren't welcome. So they stopped interrupting. They stopped warning. They stopped protecting. Not because they disappeared, but because you stopped honoring them. And now here you are, at the edge of awareness, feeling that familiar tug, that sense that something needs to change, not because the other person suddenly became worse, but because you finally became more honest. This is growth, and growth doesn't always feel empowering at first. Sometimes it feels like grief. Grief for the time you gave. Grief for the version of you that tried so hard. Grief for the hope you invested. Grief for the reality you wanted instead of the one you were living. Let that be real. You don't need to rush past it, but you also don't need to drown in it, because awareness is not meant to punish you. It's meant to free you. Red flags don't show up to ruin your dreams. They show up to redirect you. And redirection always feels uncomfortable when you're attached to an outcome. When you're attached to what could be. When you're attached to the version of someone you imagined instead of the one they consistently show you. Potential is seductive, but patterns are honest, and you can't build peace on potential. You can only build it on consistency. This is where self-respect gets real, not in affirmations, not in quotes, but in decisions. Quiet ones, private ones, the kind nobody claps for, the kind that don't come with validation, the kind where you choose yourself and still feel the ache of letting go. Choosing yourself doesn't always feel powerful in the moment. Sometimes it feels lonely. Sometimes it feels like doubt. Sometimes it feels like standing still while everyone else keeps moving. But choosing yourself is the only choice that compounds. It builds strength over time, clarity over time, trust over time. Every time you honor a red flag, you tell your intuition it can trust you again. And that trust is everything. Because once you trust yourself, you stop negotiating your worth. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop overgiving to earn safety. You stop confusing chaos with passion. You stop mistaking inconsistency for excitement. You stop calling anxiety chemistry. And you start recognizing peace when it shows up. But here's the truth most people aren't ready for. Peace can feel boring when your nervous system is used to survival mode. Calm can feel unfamiliar when you've been living in reaction. Consistency can feel suspicious when unpredictability became your baseline. So sometimes red flags don't just test your discernment. They test your readiness to heal. Because walking away from what's familiar, even when it's harmful, requires courage. Not loud courage, quiet courage. The kind where you don't announce anything. You just slowly stop betraying yourself. You stop responding the same way. You stop over-explaining. You stop shrinking. You stop chasing clarity from people who avoid it. And instead, you give that clarity to yourself. This is where boundaries stop being theoretical. They become lived, embodied, non-negotiable. Not because you're rigid, but because you finally understand the cost of not having them. The cost was your energy, your joy, your focus, your self-trust, and you're done paying that price. You don't need to become hardened to be protected. You need to become honest. Honest about how things affect you. Honest about what you can no longer tolerate. Honest about what drains you instead of nourishing you. That honesty might make some people uncomfortable, especially the ones who benefited from your silence. But discomfort is not danger, and someone else's discomfort is not a reason for you to abandon yourself. Let them misunderstand you. Let them think whatever they need to think. You are not here to be digestible. You are here to be whole, and wholeness requires discernment. It requires you to stop gaslighting your own experiences, to stop minimizing your feelings, to stop telling yourself you're asking for too much when you're really asking for the bare minimum. If something keeps costing you your peace, that's not growth. That's erosion. And erosion is slow. It's subtle. It happens quietly until one day you look up and don't recognize yourself anymore. This is your interruption, your pause in the pattern, your chance to choose differently, not dramatically, not impulsively, but consciously, with clarity, with self-respect, with trust in your own knowing. You don't need to confront everyone. You don't need to explain everything. You don't need to justify your exit. Sometimes the most powerful move is simply no longer participating, no longer engaging, no longer offering access to someone who hasn't shown care for your inner world. That's not cruelty. That's alignment. And alignment will always feel lighter than forcing yourself to fit where you don't belong. You are allowed to outgrow dynamics. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to decide that something that once felt okay no longer does. That doesn't make you inconsistent. It makes you aware. And awareness is the beginning of every meaningful transformation. This is you choosing clarity over chaos, truth over comfort, self-trust over self-betrayal. And the more you honor red flags, the less you'll need painful lessons to teach you what you already know. You are learning to listen again. And that is powerful. You're not ending something. You're completing a lesson. And completion doesn't need drama. It needs honesty. You didn't come this far just to keep repeating the same cycle with new faces. You didn't wake up to yourself just to go back to sleep for someone else's comfort. What you're feeling now isn't loss. It's relief learning how to stand upright again. It's the quiet strength of no longer negotiating with your own soul. Look at you. Still here. Still open. Still willing to grow. That matters. You didn't harden. You didn't close your heart. You refined it. You learned where your limits are. You learned what your body tries to tell you before your mind catches up. You learned that peace isn't something you earn by suffering. It's something you choose by listening. You don't need to replay the past anymore. You don't need to prove how much you endured. You don't need to explain why you changed. Your evolution speaks for itself. From here on, you move differently. Not louder, not colder, clearer. You notice faster. You respond sooner. You trust what you feel without putting it on trial. And when something isn't right, you don't stay long enough to lose yourself again. That's growth. That's wisdom earned. Let this version of you be the one that listens the first time. The one that doesn't need pain to validate intuition. The one that walks away with grace instead of staying out of fear. You're not behind. You're right on time for your life. And if this message met you where you are, if it reminded you who you're becoming, stay connected with this space. Join the movement. Subscribe to Echoes of Enlightenment Oracle. We're walking forward together.